Alan, how you doing?
How are you?
Thanks for waiting, sir.
Good. I actually have a few jokes first. How did God create heaven and earth in 6 days? Well, there's actually 3 answers. One, he didn't use any Microsoft software. Second is, he screwed around for 5 days and then pulled an all-nighter. And the third answer is, he didn't have an installed base. So the fact that we're here means I think that we get to argue these things. I do have some things to quibble with you about, and then I'd like to get to my assertion.
Sure.
First of all, you can not only be explanatory, but you can also be predictive with math. So I just want to point that out. You can't be prescriptive.
Yeah.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Predictions are great.
Predictive. That's certainly true.
Yes.
Second thing is, have you read Lee Strobel's books?
I've read. Well, I was going to say I've read all of them.
Good,
I don't know that that's
great.
the case
because that's what I'm going to argue from. I'm a former atheist, former hardcore atheist, I might add as well. So,
wow, you're really
well, I found God or He found me. So, here goes. All set?
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're not nearly as smart as you think, nor am I. But be that as it may, let's get down to this, okay?
Sure.
What do you consider to be evidence?
I think I pretty much just answered that a minute ago.
I'll give you a few examples. Corroborative, archaeological, historical. There are those types of evidence also as well.
It depends.
And I do use the legal terms.
As Tracie just pointed out, it very much depends on what it is that you're trying to prove.
It does.
As to what types of evidence you're going to accept.
Yeah, so for example, when somebody says, I want to prove God exists, the first question is, they have to demonstrate what it is they're calling God, and then they also have to demonstrate a measurable, demonstrable, verifiable manifestation, because that's what existence is.
I'm with you on that. And by the way, I should tell you, I went a year to Caltech, and so I'm not unfamiliar with science, too, as well. So if you want to talk about space-time warpage, that's fine with me, but that's not my point.
I'd rather not. Let's stick to Stroble, because I've already debunked everything he said.
Is that there is a God, and it is a Christian one, okay? So that's what I'm going to seek to try to convince you of. Is that okay?
Sure.
It's not okay. I mean,
Go for
you're
it.
free to assert it.
You asked me what kind of God I believe in. I've just said.
I understand that.
Perfect.
I understand that, but for clarity, when you say God and the Christian God,
yes,
not all Christian God versions are the same. For example,
I'm with you on that.
And I still don't know what the referent is. I just know
I won't make you dig through characteristics right now because I want to get on to what
you're
actually
saying. So let's just assume that we're talking about the early Christian God, the early writings. Is that okay with you? That's the assertion I'm making. So here goes some proof, right? First of all, how do you explain? First of all, I submit as evidence the book of the New Testament, specifically Mark, Matthew, John, and Luke, and also the writings
of Paul,
Josephus, who was a historian who was not certainly Christian.
Okay, let me pause you right there.
Certainly.
You're submitting the Gospels and Josephus as evidence for the existence of God, or the existence of Jesus, or Jesus' divinity?
Actually, the existence of God, the existence of the existence of Jesus Christ, and the fact that he claimed,
so all three. So then let me go ahead and kind of ask this, because I think we can nip this in the bud right now.
It's a fairly long discussion, but
no, it's
okay.
a really short discussion, and here's why. First of all, we can get rid of Josephus, because Josephus was not a contemporary to Jesus by any historical account. So
actually, I think that he lived within 20 years of his...
That's not a contemporary.
I'm not done. He lived within 20 years of his death, and the people that were around that saw his miracles lived far after he died.
Okay.
Right?
Can I go ahead and finish?
There were thousands of them, actually.
Yes.
Right?
And so we've heard.
According to the stories.
Can you name any of them? Do we have any eyewitness accounts from any of them? Here's my point. That was redundant. That was redundant. Alan.
Accounts? Absolutely.
Alan, that was redundant.
Rhetorical.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
You there? That was a rhetorical question. I want to get to this because I can nip this in the bud right now.
You can't nip this in the bud.
God, can I frickin' try?
Well, sure.
Okay.
You can certainly try.
Who wrote the Gospels? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Well, okay, so now how you get into Q and all that kind of stuff, but certainly the Gospels of St. Paul were written by Paul, who was Saul.
There is no Gospel of St. Paul. Those are the epistles of Paul.
I understand that. You're playing semantical games.
No, I'm
semantic.
not playing semantics.
A gospel is a very different
I put you on
thing
hold.
than a letter.
I suggested Paul. You said the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Josephus. And I'm explaining why I can discount those, and I'll be happy to explain why I can discount Paul as well. We have no idea who wrote the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, at all. We have no autographed copies. We do know, at least we believe through generally good scholarship, around when they were written. And none of them were written at any time while Jesus was alive, and none of them were written by eyewitnesses. They're written by people who are reporting hearsay. Josephus, also, decades after Jesus reportedly died, and reportedly resurrected, if you buy those stories, also never met Jesus, was not alive during that time. And the one passage, there are two passages, within Josephus's works that mention Jesus. One of them is a quick blurb that says James, the brother of Jesus. That one's generally accepted to be legitimate. The second one, which is the Testimonium Flavius, which says about this time there was a man by the name of Jesus and he was good, whatever, and it goes on to call him, he was the Messiah. Those are words that could not have been spoken by a Pharisee Jew, and it is generally conceded, even by Christian scholars, that this is at best a partial, if not complete interpolation by late Christians. Paul also never met Jesus. You can make a claim about his Damascus Road experience where he ran into the spirit of zombie Jesus. But what we have are a collection of stories about stories. They are writings from people who believed this about stories. They are not evidence for the truth, the veracity of the individual stories. You cannot, and even if we had first-hand eyewitness accounts, as we do, for example, from alien abductees, who constantly say, and there are more than one of them, it's not just a lone person out here,
right.
There are groups of people, couples, families, selections of people that say, yes, we were abducted by aliens. We can actually go and physically talk to those people right now. If we didn't, and we let their stories build, and someone in 20 or 30 years, even in today's society, decided to write about them, those writings wouldn't be worth the paper they're printed on with regard to determining the accuracy of those reports. And that's in today's society. 2,000 years ago, when you were relying on oral tradition and these stories are passed around from person to person, there is not a single eyewitness contemporary account of any event from the life of Jesus, to the point where we can't even date it, and we may have valid scholarly reasons to question his very existence.
I want to be like the next caller. I just gotta...
I'm sorry, I got to put you on hold. Alan hung up.
Oh, no.
Evidently, when you counter somebody's claims of the Bible proves the Bible true, they give up. It drives me nuts. There's a reason why I shrugged and hemmed and hawed when you came saying that you were going to be beginning from the standpoint of Lee Stroble, and that's this. Lee Stroble plays himself up to be a skeptic. He's like one of many people, like you, Alan, who do this, I used to be an atheist, but I either found God or God found me. Boy, that's clever. Kirk Cameron, for example, claims to have been, what's the word that a devout atheist, as if there's anything you could possibly be devout about in rejecting a belief. Maybe adamant, maybe impassioned. Right. Devout? Wow. Did I miss a Sunday meeting? All of these folks, but Lee Strobel in particular, I'll focus on him. Lee Strobel in his books, The Case for Christ, The Case for a Creator, etc., pretends to be the skeptic reporter. And he runs around interviewing people, pretending to be the skeptic and exercising critical thought. I submit that Lee Strobel's critical thinking skills are grossly inadequate, and I also submit that he has yet to question people, and include them in his book, who disagree with him. He goes to people within the Discovery Institute, for example, or ministers or others, who agree with him, the point that he's trying to prove, and he asks them softball, weak-ass questions. And then he steals, by the way, you didn't have to use Lee Stroble. If you're going to start arguing from the Gospels, you might as well refer to Josh McDowell.
Yep.
I mean, that would have been at least slightly more reasonable, because while Stroble is a complete asshat who pretends to be a skeptic, McDowell actually tried to do some scholarly research. Unfortunately, he's not a scholar or an historian or anything along those lines, and so he managed to get all kinds of things wrong. And if you go to infidels.org and click on the library and do a search for evidence that demands a verdict, you'll find, I think from Jeffrey Lauder and several others, a chapter by chapter, a treatment of Josh McDowell's evidence that demands a verdict, that point out exactly where he got it wrong and why these claims. And I've heard your claims before, and Alan, I used to believe them, and I used to advocate for Lee Stroble, and I used to advocate for Josh McDowell as these champions of apologists, and they, by preaching to me as the choir, kept me convinced. And it wasn't until I actually bothered to investigate whether or not their claims were true. It wasn't until I investigated what objections critical thinkers, atheists, free thinkers, and people from other religions, if you want to find out what's wrong with your religion, go ask somebody in another one, had launched with regard to these apologetics. It is absurd in the highest degree to come, yes, I realize the Bible isn't a single book. It's a collection of writing. First of all, it's absurd to claim that it's consistent. It's not. I mean, if you can't look at the different characters of God at different times in both the Old and New Testament and realize that there's no consistency there, the consistency is in your mind. The fulfilled prophecy is in your mind. The believability is in your mind. You go into it predisposed, wanting to believe it. Oh, look, there's all these documents. What documents? There's not a single contemporary historical document outside of the Bible regarding Jesus at all. There's nothing to confirm he lived, nothing to confirm any acts he did, nothing to confirm that he was killed, and certainly nothing to confirm he was resurrected. And yet when you listen to Lee Stroble, as I did in a video yesterday, where he listed his 5 E's, and I don't remember them all, but I did respond to them in an email, and I'll be happy to send them to you. One of his 5 E's that are supposed to be so convincing about Jesus is empty tomb. What? The tomb was empty. Okay. So the most logical conclusion from reports of an empty tomb is that some magical sky being rolled away the rock and resurrected his embodied self, and he went. That's the most rational conclusion from that. I mean, what about? I mean, you guys gloss over all kinds of stuff. One thing Tracie had pointed out was this. You're reading along in Matthew, and all of a sudden, and the bodies of the dead got up and walked around town, and then this happened. No, go back to that. You just talked about a whole bunch of zombies, and one verse. They're not contemporary accounts. They're not by eyewitnesses. No one is disputing that people have believed this. No one is disputing that there were Christians at the time. You can cite Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Josephus. It doesn't matter. None of them are saying Christians didn't exist, and I'm not saying that either. The question is whether or not the claims of Christians, whether or not the claims of the Bible are true. And a testimony, no matter how strongly it's believed, is not evidence of veracity. The truth of a matter is not determined by either how many people believe it or the strength of their belief, including whether or not they're willing to die for it, which is, I'm sure, one of the things that you'd eventually gotten to, because it's Stroble and McDowell's favorite. Would these apostles have willingly sacrificed their lives and been stoned rather than recant their beliefs? Sure. Are you saying that those people who have died for other religions make those religions true as well, even when they contradict your own? We're looking for evidence, not assertions, not anecdotes. There's an E for you, Stroble. Stay away from the A's. Give us E's. It's easy. I have no... Look, gravity. It's maddening.
The other problem that I have is that even if you could demonstrate something that was not explainable, asserting that a God has caused it is meaningless because you don't know what a God is until you can examine it.
Yeah.
So if you have if you're claiming a cause that you can't examine, and you're just looking at a result and saying, I don't know what this result is, so let's say a God did it. And I'm like, well, what is a God? Well, I don't know, because we can't examine one. So we don't even, it's just like saying X did it.
Yeah, let's explain a mystery with a mystery.
So even if you had like zombies walking around Austin, you would still have, and somebody said God did this, I'd still be like, well, what? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, you need something.
What does that mean?
You've got to have some definition.
It's no better than saying X did it.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have a God to examine, if we don't have something to examine as the cause, then we're saying, X did it.
It could be magical universe creating pixies. How is your understanding of God distinct from magical universe creating pixies or magic man done it, whatever? How is your understanding of God distinct from that? And what is the evidence that supports that distinction?
That's what I'm saying. It's like whenever it gets to it, it's like when it gets down to it, when you go back, when you use the historicity, when you're using the logic, it finally is going to come down to a point where you have to say, well, how do we find out if this is right? You have to have something measurable. And if you don't, then you're talking about nothing. And if you've got nothing that you can measure, and that's what you're calling your cause, then you're labeling nothing God.
Yeah.
And saying nothing is God. And I don't even know what to make of that.
Yeah. And one more quick point, and we'll get right back to calls on this issue of the historicity of Jesus. I don't know if you're still listening, Alan. I hope so. And we'd like to have you call back at some point, but I mean, and I'll even consider more stuff, but you got to come with something better than that. On the historicity of Jesus, one of the big things from apologists is, well, we have more evidence for the existence of Jesus than X, Y, or Z. In most cases, they're just flat out wrong. They are wrong in both the quantity and nature of evidence. Caesar is probably their favorite thing, and yet we have things written in his own hand.
Right.
And we have things written by opponents of his.
I'll usually take Socrates. Even though I think that Plato claims to have been to have known him personally.
Right.
But I mean, I'll even sometimes give him that.
Oh, I'm fine. If you want to say Socrates,
okay.
that's actually kind of in a way where I was going with this. I would grant that if Jesus were portrayed character-wise in the same vein as Socrates, I would say that we had decent evidence that this individual existed for all practical purposes. But whether he existed or not doesn't matter, in the same way that it doesn't matter whether Socrates existed or not. Whether he's a sock puppet of Plato's or a real person, there are words attributed to Socrates, and we can analyze them on their own merits to determine what their validity is.
It's the arguments that matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in Jesus' case, even if we had rock hard evidence that the individual existed, and I'm not asserting that he didn't, I'm just pointing out legitimate exceptions, that his existence is not evidence of the miraculous feats attributed to him at all, any more than any other supposed miracle man. There are men living today that we can go and interview who are reported to have performed miracles all over the world. Miracle men, and people who claim to live off prana and sunlight and not eat for 10 months. Oh, it just drives me nuts, the credulity of people who will buy into this. But Jesus' existence is, within Christianity, intrinsically tied to who he claimed to be, or who Christians portray him claiming to be. His miracles, the things that he did, his divinity. Whether or not I believe Socrates existed doesn't make any difference. Whether or not I believe Jesus existed does, from a Christian perspective. You can't separate the two. But anyway, I've gone on way too long.
Toronto's been holding. Yeah.